Look at her dress. Did she get it at the clearance rack? You can hear it in their laughter, the soft ripples of condescension that feel like rain on a tin roof. 7 minutes. 7 minutes is the time between a cruel joke and a fall that echoes through boardrooms. My name is Jasmine Baptiste, and right now I am standing under chandeliers in a dress that cost less than their napkin rings. They think it makes me small. They think it makes them large. They do not know who I really am. They do not know that in less than 10 minutes, their 9-figure dream will be a smear on a balance sheet. Catherine Morrison clinks her champagne glass, a practiced smile locking her face into superiority. She glides through the room like she owns the air. Her son Ethan sits beside me, white-knuckled, smiling because that is what he's been taught to do. David, my father's murderer, presides over the table that was supposed to be his triumph. He talks about legacy, as if he understands the word. The family laughs. Cameras flash. Somewhere in the crowd a phone vibrates. Someone is live streaming, the little red dot growing brighter with every view. If you've ever been underestimated, drop a line below. Then listen. This is not a story about rage. It's about patience. It's not about spectacle. It's about evidence. They called me names that night. They waved their napkins and made the kind of jokes that thrived on the assumption that I belonged to the background. She must have shopped for that on a budget, Catherine said, loud enough for a few predictable guffaws. One of the board wives, Margaret, I think, followed up with a softer, condescending tone. So, brave of him marrying down. It was performative pity, thin as tissue. I catalogued everything. Every insult was another page in a file I planned on opening someday. The file began with a man I will never stop naming, William Baptiste. My father built things with a mind like a vault. He saw patterns where others saw noise. He taught me to look for the quiet hinge that makes a door move. He showed me the small write-down in a ledger that hides $100,000. He taught me how to be patient. He taught me how to document. On a November morning, I found my father in the workshop where he slept among prototypes and coffee rings. He didn't wake up. They told me it was an accident. They told me grief is messy and paperwork takes time. I knew, with an honesty that made my stomach hollow, that it was not an accident. My father had built an algorithm, he called it his map, that could predict patterns in consumer behavior in ways that would change advertising, distribution, supply. I remember him holding a faded legal pad, laughing quietly about the first company that would buy us out and let us write our names on plaques. The name at the top of that plaque, in the end, was different. A patent in David Morrison's name appeared in court filings a few months after my father's funeral. The submission looked clean. The signatures looked neat. The handwriting that once matched my father's scrawling notes was gone. The company called it a tragic coincidence. The state labeled it a sad loss. The men in suits offered condolences and moved on. I learned there are two kinds of grief. One wants a memorial. The other wants the truth. I chose the truth. I tell you this now not for pity, but to explain the coldness that took root in me. I worked at Target for years. I stacked shelves, scanned barcodes, smiled in short bursts. I learned how to be invisible on purpose. People lower their guard around someone they think is harmless. I learned to code on late nights, half asleep over a hand-me-down laptop. I read annual reports like prayer books. I taught myself to read contracts the way my father read blueprints, for the seams, the hidden bolts, the clauses that open like trapdoors. No single moment made me a strategist. It was the slow accumulation of small administrative humiliations, the mortgage notices, the phone calls to collections, the polite clearinghouse voices that said there wasn't much anyone could do. Each no became another piece of the plan. I did what my father taught me. I documented receipts, emails, rough drafts of my father's notes, his sketches, the drafts of code saved to a thumb drive he used to carry on his keyring. I stored backups in places I trusted, and in places people assumed were worthless. People like to imagine vengeance as sudden. Films pander to a single glorious moment. Real justice is a ledger. It's paperwork. It's witnesses. It's a timeline that prosecutors can read like a map. I surrounded myself with lawyers, not boxers. I sought auditors, not weapons. I gathered testimony quietly, cleaning staff who remembered odd men at odd hours, a delivery driver who remembered an unusual pallet, a former contractor who'd seen a man leave with a battered briefcase at night. I did not break the law. I did the hard work the law requires. I found evidence and I waited until it could not be shrugged away. David Morrison built the Morrison Technologies brand into something people trusted. He painted the company as a flagship, even as he sailed on a pirate's compass. Investors saw a glossy quarterly. He saw a way to cover a theft with profit. The algorithm, my father's map, became the pillar of that profit. When I looked at his filings, I saw a trail of numbers that didn't add up unless someone had smuggled intellectual property into corporate accounts. I saved the anomalies, the minute mismatches, the suspiciously timed transfers that lined up with his new patent. And then I did what felt like the bluntest part of strategy. I put myself where they could see me and assume anything they wanted. Ethan was not my target because he was unimportant. He was my entry point because he was human, and he was blind to his family's rot. We met at a small coffee shop, and he was softer than his surname suggested. He told me about growing up under the shadow of a company dinner. He told me about being taught to laugh at the right time. He didn't know what his father did. He only knew what his father expected. I dated him because I wanted to see the world from inside their living room. I dated him because when the family introduced me to the fold, they could test my stitches without worrying a seam would tear. I let them see the version of me that wears flats and buys off-peak gift cards. I let them think my ambitions were harmless. While they scripted me small, I was building a company inside my head. I founded a small startup, intentionally unassuming on paper, a shell, the kind of quiet organization venture capitalists ignore until it becomes inconvenient. I partnered with a legal team that believed in meticulous detail and with a small investor at Yang Industries who hated danger but liked the numbers I showed him. I sold what I had built to Zhang for $500 million. That number sits heavy on my chest sometimes, and other times it feels like a tool. It was a transaction with signatures and paperwork, with escrow and oversight. It gave me power I had been denied since my father's handwriting smudged on a funeral card. But power without positioning is vanity. I needed a seat where a pen stroke could decide the future of another company. I needed to be more than a portfolio. I needed the authority to sign off. I pursued a role at Yang, not for ego, not for the headlines, but for the single cold reason that certain clauses require an approver, and certain approvers could legally walk away from a deal in real time. During the decade it took me to place myself, I played 1,000 small parts. At family dinners I laughed when I should have laughed. I wore dresses I hated when it suited their narrative. I let them assume what made them comfortable, that I was grateful to be included. All the while, I fed my attorneys with the documents we'd collected over the years. Internal memos that contradicted public statements, contractors' logs that placed David at locations he denied, a thumb drive of my father's code that matched lines of Morrison's product, and finally a recording that no one expected. It took courage to listen to the man who finally spoke the truth. Marcus Thompson had been a small cog in their machine, the kind of man who believed that loyalty was his only pathway to security. He had been involved in arrangements he'd come to regret. He came forward with a confession, not because of me directly, but because the pressure of what I had done with the documents made silence untenable. Marcus's statement was the piece that turned suspicion into prosecution. He told a jury, with a voice that shook, about the night my father died, about David's involvement, and about the way a patent application had been rushed through the same network of favors. Marcus's name is not heroic. He was a witness, flawed and human, and ultimately useful. So here I am, 7 minutes away from a cake cutting and the family pride that would put my father's name under theirs on another plaque. I can feel Catherine's words like cold rain. I have rehearsed what I will say, but rehearsals are for actors. I am not an actor here. I am an executor of a plan that has been a decade in the making. 5 minutes. The band is warming up. The MC makes an awkward joke about new beginnings, and everyone laughs like they're polishing their morals. Ethan squeezes my hand. I squeeze back because he has loved me in pieces he did not understand. He is not the enemy. He is a casualty of their choices. 3 minutes. The cameras begin to sweep. This is where they think I will crumble. Catherine rises to make her toast. Her voice is velvet dipped in vinegar. She speaks about social continuity, about lineage and taste, and she punctuates the toast with the kind of glances that cut. Who would have thought, she says out loud, that we would welcome someone so practical into the family? The room tuts politely. Someone near the band makes the telling demand for laughter. They laugh. 1 minute. My phone is in my clutch. My lawyer is on the other end, voice steady. Are you ready? I say I am. There is a clause, a line in a document, that allows Yang to withdraw an offer before the deal is consummated if material facts have been misrepresented. It is not a weapon I forged. It is a legal provision for exactly this kind of contingency. The law sometimes works with a slowness that feels like justice, and sometimes it works fast as lightning when you have the right fuse. 30 seconds. Catherine moves to hug Ethan. I imagine the room like a ledger, entries on paper, faces across a table. My hand moves, almost of its own accord, to the small device in my clutch. It is just a phone. In it, a queue of documents waits, a signed contract, a bank account ledger showing transfers, an email chain in which David asks for discretion about certain code origins. There is also the file Marcus turned over to prosecutors, a voice memo, compressed and clear, recorded on a shaky phone in a parking lot. Marcus's confession is not cinematic. He murmurs names, and names are enough. 10 seconds. My heartbeat is a metronome. The chatter around me dulls. I can hear only what my father taught me. Document, wait, strike where the law will hold. 5. I stand. I do not cry. I do not shout. I walk to the microphone Cassie from Public Relations adjusted for reflections, and I place my hand over the receiver like it's a gavel. I let the room think it is a simple speech. Then I speak. Good evening, I say, and my voice is calm, practiced, steady. I want to thank you for including me tonight. I want to thank you for accepting me the way you did, as entertainment. It made certain things possible. A few titters, a few offended faces shift, cameras lean in. I work at Jiang Industries, I continue. A television somewhere in the corner zooms a face into a close-up. The red dot on one phone gets brighter. I sold my company to Jiang last year for $500 million. The room exhales. Ethan's jaw tightens. Catherine's smile thins. It seems, I say, sliding a document across the lectern, letting the image of a signature catch the light, that Morrison Technologies had something to hide. I press play on the memo Marcus recorded. His voice is weak at first, then growing firmer once he realizes the truth has weight. David did it, he says. I helped. He wanted to make it look like a natural death. I don't know why I stayed quiet. I was scared. Someone from the front row begins to sob. David's face contorts. His hands are small when they used to be large. I hold up a contract in my left hand and a screen grab of a wire transfer in my right. On the screen, an email chain scrolls with timestamps. I narrate in the same calm cadence the essential points. Where the code came from, how timelines match, who signed what, and under what guise. I do not embellish. I do not scream accusations into the ether. I present facts. And because of these material misrepresentations, I say, leaning forward, Yang is withdrawing its acquisition offer. This is the moment they thought would never come. The room fractures into sound. Someone cries, "What?" A man on the board stands, face ashen. The MC fumbles with his glasses. The live stream spikes. It is not theatrics. It is process. My counsel submits the documents to Jiang's legal department. I authorize, as a representative and signatory of the buyer, the formal notice to withdraw. I do not explain market maneuvers. I do not teach how to take down a share price. All I did, in public terms, was exercise a right that the law and the contract give to an approver when undisclosed material facts are presented. The press room turns into chaos. Someone shouts for the lawyers. Phones ring. The band stops playing. David lunges forward, voice raw. "This is false. Catherine's face drains of color. Ethan looks at me as if he has been punched. Cameras capture this exact second, and the clip begins to travel at the speed of outrage. The live stream that started as a wedding broadcast becomes a breaking news wire. 20,000 views. A minute later, 200,000. Within an hour, it is on every news site, and the phones of regulators begin to buzz because the documents I presented are now in their hands. People ask later if I felt triumph in that moment. The truth is stranger. I felt a peculiar quietness, like a lock clicking into place after years of trying keys. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder in memory, because this was what he had trained me for, to find the seam and show it to light, and the rest unfolded the way careful evidence tends to. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened inquiries. Regulatory bodies demanded audits. The board of Morrison Technologies convened emergency sessions. Investors, jittery at the unknown and frightened by the optics, began to pull back. Stock plummeted. Headlines used words they reserve for scandals: embezzlement, fraud, cover-up. Marcus's testimony was submitted to prosecutors, alongside the internal memos, the payment records, and the patent timelines. Facts make juries do what moralizing never could. They force reckonings. David was arrested not on a glamorous midnight raid, but on a set of charges rooted in the documents and the testimony. Marcus, who had begun as a reluctant witness, testified. Catherine's role in the social cover-up, the phone calls she made to press people to look away, and the influence she wielded over certain board members, emerged in depositions. The law did what it is designed to do. It listened to evidence and called people to account. Within days, the $950 million acquisition offer that had been poised as the Morrison family's crowning jewel was dead. The company that had once towered in their eyes shrank in valuations and in the public imagination. The markets are not poetry. They are sensitive instruments, and when a major buyer withdraws, they respond. The company lost its luster. Employees who had once celebrated bonuses began to pack desks. The executives who had toasted my humiliation found themselves answering questions they could not charm away with polite smiles. There were arrests, there were arraignments, there were cameras outside courthouses. David pleaded not guilty at first, and then the weight of documents and witnesses did what force never could. Sentencing followed conviction. Marcus's cooperation led to mitigated terms for him. The law can be brutally practical and sometimes merciful in the same breath. Media vultures circled, of course, but the river that runs through a legal case is not the evening news. It is the transcripts, the sworn testimony, the quiet papers filed at 3 in the morning. I watched as those pages moved through the system and did what they were made to do. After the trials, there were financial settlements and asset seizures. Part of what the courts awarded, and what Zhang recovered in time, thanks to the clarity of the evidence, was redirected to a trust. I insisted that a portion of recovered assets go to the William Baptiste Foundation, a name I insisted on for reasons beyond sentiment. The foundation funds scholarships for black students studying algorithms and systems design, and invests in black-owned startups that the industry too often ignores. The plaque reads simply, "In memory of William Baptiste, for the maps he left and the paths we build." People ask me if I wanted them to suffer. The honest answer is no, in the petty way they imagine. I did not seek to watch their fall as entertainment. What I sought was accountability, for truth to be recognized and for the men who had profited from stolen work to be required to answer for it. You can call that vengeance if you like. I call it justice. There is a difference. Life after the verdicts was a strange hybrid. I continued to spend quiet hours at Target, working a few shifts to stay grounded. The uniform humbled me. There is dignity in the mundane. My old shifts proved to be a living memorial, a reminder that even after the headlines, life's rhythms persist. I kept one of my wedding dresses framed in my living room, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of a moment I refused to let become a punchline. Next to it, a plaque detailing the $950 million acquisition that did not happen. It feels right to make irony into education. The world loved the sensational bits. The moment I stood at the mic, the clips of David's face as the room turned, the flood of comments that gushed with admiration and outrage. My name trended. Interviews followed. Requests for photos with my framed dress arrived. People asked me what they could do if they felt small. My answer is always the same. Document, persist, and find allies who will treat your files as evidence rather than as gossip. I will be honest, and here is one of the messier parts. My relationship with Ethan was complicated beyond what any story can neatly box. He loved me in the way someone loves a safe harbor they didn't know how to reach. He suffered when his family imploded. He judged me at times, and he loved me at others. He has said publicly that he did not know the extent of his father's wrongdoing. I believe him in some ways and not in others. Our life together required a reckoning. He chose to help in ways he could, giving testimony, being candid in depositions about the pressure he felt. Love, in my case, required both courage and a ruthless clarity about what I would accept. He is not the villain. The rot was wider than any one person. There were voices that called me cruel. There were others who called me brilliant. They both missed a central truth. This was not an act of theatrical revenge. It was an insistence on a ledger balancing. When you are a black woman in rooms that were not built for you, you learn that often the most persuasive thing is a paper trail, and the patience to see it read out loud in a courtroom. After the dust settled, journalists tried to reduce the years to a single phrase. The black bride who crushed a deal. It made good headlines, but it missed the slow accumulation behind the headline. They loved the image of a dress and a microphone. They liked the irony that the woman in cheap fabric toppled a 9-figure acquisition. But the photographs did not show the nights I spent with my father's old notebooks. They did not show the calls at 3 in the morning to a lawyer who told me to hold and wait. They did not show the sting when friends said I should move on, and I could not, because moving on would mean letting theft remain unaccounted for. There is a temptation in the telling of this story to offer a how-to. Build a file, collect a tape, plant an insider. I refuse that temptation because the world does not need manuals for retribution. Instead, I will say what I learned that anyone can use without breaking laws or moral codes. Keep records, trust evidence over rumors, seek counsel who respects the difference between anger and a case, and channel energy into structures that survive gossip. Use institutions, not vengeance. Let the law do its job. That is what I did. That is what made the $950 million evaporate. Facts presented under oath. The aftermath also included things I did not expect. Young people reached out to say they had been dismissed by family gatherings so many times that they stopped bringing their degrees home. Entrepreneurs wrote to say they had patents they feared would be stolen. Students told me that seeing the foundation's first scholarships changed their trajectory. That is the kind of ripple I could not have planned when I was cataloging insults at a kitchen table. The impact of justice moved past the headline and into small plans. A scholarship application, a bank account opened for a startup, a classroom freed up to teach an algorithm, and a look at how to protect intellectual property without being privileged. Sometimes on quiet nights I imagine my father in his workshop, not dead, but fuming at the injustice of being reduced to a story. I hope, in some sense, I honored him by making the truth loud enough to be inconvenient. I hope that somewhere he hears the hum of machines and feels recognized. I tell you all this not to preach but to offer a map. Not a map of how to take down a corporation, that would be irresponsible, but a map of what matters when injustice arrives at your door. Documents, witnesses, patience, and the courage to present facts. There is a moral edge here that matters. We live in a world where the loudest voice often wins. If the truth can be loud enough through evidence, it will win sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. 5 years later, the Jasmine Baptiste Foundation has seeded a handful of startups. One of those companies just launched a supply chain application meant for independent retailers. A young black woman who received the first scholarship now leads its engineering team. She wrote me a letter that said, "You showed me that being underestimated is not a life sentence." That was the moment I felt the ache in my chest shift from sour anger to something quieter and more usable. I keep working at Target in spare hours because it keeps me tethered. People ask why I do it, and I tell them, because dignity is not a thing you buy with settlements. It is something you practice in small tasks, in how you show up when nobody is watching. It is an act of fidelity to the life you once had and the life you now make. Sometimes when a customer compliments my patience, I smile and tell a small truth. Work with dignity. It is not a slogan, it is an ethic. I hang my old name tag in my office, next to the framed dress. They are not contradictions. They are reminders. One life, many acts. There are critics, as in any story. There are those who say I should have forgiven earlier, who say I should have made peace with relatives. Forgiveness is a personal ledger, not a public transaction. I have forgiven in ways that mean I no longer carry bitterness as a daily ballast. But forgiveness did not erase the necessity of accountability. You can have both. They are not mutually exclusive. So if there is one thing to take away, and there are many small lessons nested in the years I lived to tell this, it is this: document, build, and let institutions work. Do not be tempted to make violence your statement. Let evidence be the voice that calls wrongs to account. Be patient in the way a tree is patient. No drama, just steady rings that prove growth. When I look back at the wedding, I sometimes still see the cheap fabric and the echoing laughter. But now the image has a different edge. It is not a symbol of humiliation, but a marker of a day the ledger balanced. They mocked the black bride. They did not know who she really was. They did not know that she kept receipts, kept notes, kept a stubborn faith in paperwork, and the possibility of justice. If this story touches something in you, that urge to be recognized, that sting of being undervalued, tell me in the comments. Share a moment when someone underestimated you and you surprised them. And if you want to hear other stories where truth and patience outlasted spectacle, subscribe. There are more lives like mine, quiet, complicated, full of small, stubborn preparations. And sometimes, with enough evidence and enough courage, the fall of a Goliath becomes the beginning of a different kind of work.